Sound good.
Okay.
We are live, so welcome everybody to this Ignatius Press Live interview. Today we're interviewing Tyler Rowley, who's the author of Because of Our Fathers, 23 Catholics Tell How Their Fathers Led Them to Christ. He's the editor of this volume and also wrote an introduction, really excellent introduction. I'm Thomas Jacoby. I'm an editor at Ignatius Press in San Francisco, at our offices here. That's why I have this nice bookshelf in the background. To give you guys a short introduction to Tyler himself. So Tyler, he's the editor of this book, Because of Our Fathers, but he's also himself a father. And he's the president of Servants of Life for Christ, which defends unborn children through politics, media, and pro-life activism. And he's also a leader in young adult ministry for the Diocese of Providence, Rhode Island. Tyler graduated from Brown University, where he studied political science and played football, and he lives in Rhode Island with his wife and 3 children. Is that right, Tyler?
Yes, Thomas, exactly.
Excellent. So Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real privilege.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thanks for publishing my book too.
Oh man, that was the best part of all this. So first things first, you were struck with the idea for this book while driving one day, listening to the radio. Is that right?
All my great ideas come when I'm driving, yes.
So what happened there?
So I was listening to Catholic radio like I usually do, and one of the contributors for the book is Father Gerald Murray, and he's an amazing priest out of the Archdiocese of New York City. And he was just talking about his father because he had just buried his father the week before. So he told this particular story of when he's 7 years old, which is recounted in the book as well. And it pretty much goes like this: 7-year-old Father Murray is watching his dad go to work like he did every day, and something makes him realize that his dad is going to mass before work and that he's doing this every single day. And he had no idea. And he's sort of shocked as a 7-year-old who, thinks you only have to go to church on Sunday. And that's what he says. He says, "Dad, why do you go to church every single day? We only have to go on Sundays." And his dad said something to the effect of, "I love to be with Jesus in the Eucharist every day." And it's like this bomb goes off in the 7-year-old kid's head that his dad loves to go to church, and there's something about the Eucharist that gets him up early in the morning and drives him to church every single day, and he lives this humble life before God, the best and the biggest and the strongest guy in his life. And he's just astonished by this as a little kid, and he'll tell you that this is the impetus to him eventually giving his life to Christ in the form of a vocation of the priesthood. And he was telling that story, and my mind immediately I went back a couple of years. My priest at the time had sent me an email which contained a study about the generational transmission of faith, and we talk about that study in the book. But it's basically about how fathers and mothers pass on the faith to their children, and it shows this really, really strong correlation between the father's faith and sons and daughters. And so I kind of have those two things bouncing around my head, and then I start to think of there's got to be so many more stories out there like this, like Father Murray's, if this is true. So that's kind of how I got the idea, and I started calling around and asking people if they had a similar story. And, lo and behold, what was kind of interesting is that many of them, if not all of them, had some sort of relevant story about that, saying that, yes, their father was the best person in their life, and their father is the reason that they're Catholic. And because of that, they were so grateful and were more than willing to contribute, an essay about their father's life. And that's what the book is. It's 23 essays, different men and women across the country who write about the things that their fathers said and did to keep them Catholic, who their fathers were.
Well, and the contributors, they really kind of run the gamut. The writers from across the board. You got professors, bishops, and you got full-time moms. So how did you come up with the selection of these 23 essayists?
So the first thing I did was I called Father Murray. I went online and I got his email address because I know that was at least one person who had a story like this. And he was, got back to me right away and said, "Hey, if you put a book together like that, I'd be happy to contribute." So then I kind of started, I think Patrick Madrid might have been my next call, because I listen to Patrick Madrid a lot, and I know he has a relevant story about his father. And, same type of answer that, yeah, my dad is the reason I'm Catholic today, and was sort of this quiet apologist in a way, and that's why Patrick Madrid is such a great apologist. And kind of just a few people who I knew had those stories, and then I just started to think of kind of started to expand my reach by thinking of different popular Catholics that people would be interested in. Jesse Romero and Bishop Strickland and Father Paul Scalia. I didn't know, I don't know them personally, with the exception of Father Scalia. I didn't know anything about these people's fathers. And that was it. That was interesting. Is as I'm making these calls, I'm saying to myself, if the thesis of this book is true, if it has sort of any legs to it, then the response I'm going to get from these men and women who I know as committed Catholics is going to be that their father was instrumental in their faith life. And like I said, lo and behold, almost every single one had that relevant story. And again, because they were so grateful to their fathers, they were willing to contribute these essays. So half of the book is sort of popular Catholics, and I knew no one was going to buy a book because of my name, so I needed to get some people on there that people were interested in. Abby Johnson. I want to know about her dad, Father Paul Scalia, Tony Esolen, Bishop Strickland. And then really what I found to be the most interesting and fun part of the project was finding the other half, which were sort of people you wouldn't know about. And really and that was really done through networking, asking people, kind of, doing some internet searching, trying to find some really powerful stories. And I think I think we did a good job of finding, half really good stories of people you would know, and half totally random people from across the country, but with equally compelling and impressive stories of their dads.
Yeah, I agree, and I want to get back to that particular point later, because the dads themselves, they're so diverse. They have so many different approaches to fatherhood, but one thing they have in common is that they all had a decisive impact on their children.
Right.
But quickly, I want to pose a question about stories in general. So this is a book of stories. They're all true stories. But why didn't you just choose to, write a book about, giving a theory of fatherhood? Why stories? What do stories do for us that, theories don't?
Well, because then I would have had to write the whole book, and I couldn't do that. No, I've always been drawn and moved by stories, and I think whether it's a good movie or a good book, and you think about the life of Christ, right? The teaching, much of his teaching in the scriptures is done through stories. And sometimes you wonder if these are real accounts that that Christ is pointing us to. But I think there is something just sort of intrinsically powerful about a real life event. It's always when you're scrolling through movies and you see a movie that sounds interesting, and then at the end it says based on a true story, and you're like, oh, that makes it even more compelling, because I'm not just going to watch someone or read about someone's imagination, but an actual thing that happened, which makes it, I don't know what the psychology is there, maybe more relatable, more interesting, because that, it's possible in your life, right? So I think that's a part that's compelling. When you're reading these stories, you're not reading about some fictitious father out there that you maybe could never be like, because it's really someone's imagination. You're reading about 23 actual men who lived pretty much in contemporary modern times in the country that you live in. And they weren't these, they're not these canonized saints that are so holy and unapproachable. They're very approachable men. And I think that's the feedback that I've heard a lot, is that this was practical. These men are approachable, and I walked away being a better father because I can do those things. I can, that story of Patrick Madrid's father, that gave me an idea of what I can do with my family and stuff like that. So I think that's part of what makes a good story so powerful.
Yeah, that's great. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about, I think we should just talk about fatherhood, because that's really what's at stake here. And so I'm a millennial. I was born in 1989, and we've been called a fatherless generation by many. What do you think that means?
Well, I think at its core, I think it means that a large segment of our population is growing up as children without fathers living in the home. Actually, Catholic Exchange just published an article that today that I wrote, and it kind of takes a little bit about what I wrote in the book, and it kind of combines it with what's going on, out in the country right now. And the main point of the article is that fatherlessness is a national crisis. The rising rate of little boys and little girls growing up without a father who's married to their mother, who lives in their home, is staggeringly high and is getting higher. And it's among certain populations, it's skyrocketing. And out in the streets, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a festering, questions that fester in children's mind being unleashed in sort of this hostile way of like, who am I? Who made me? Who loves me? Who am I supposed to become? And in the article, I say, these kids, these teenagers and these young adults who are setting fires and attacking police, and this is what's going on in their hearts, right? Our John Paul II and Pope Benedict, they talk beautifully about all of these people. They're really longing for Christ, and they're longing for their Father, which our Father, the Father of us all, who created us. And that's the job of Catholics, is to make these children Catholic. These are passionate human beings that are fighting, for justice, albeit in a very perverted way, but it's based on what they know in life, right? Which, growing up in a fatherless home, they don't know how to direct that emotion. So it's our job to reach them and to bring them into the Catholic Church and teach them about true racial justice, true equality, how Christ transcends all of this. And once they experience the love of Christ and a father, that wound in them can start to heal. But I think that's, a fatherless country. I think part of it is just the literal lack of a father in the home. And Abby Johnson talked about this, and she got completely misunderstood in what she was saying recently. But she talked about how what people are doing now who don't like this fatherless narrative, they're saying, oh no, these children have fathers. Maybe they don't, just because they don't live in the home and they're not married to the mom. That doesn't matter. They still have fathers who see them on the weekends. And Abby's point was, this is crazy. I mean, how low are we going to put the bar for fathers? This is not the place that we want to go, where we say, like, obviously every child has a biological father, but we're talking about, dads who live in the home and are married to the mom, and we talk about, in the beginning of the book, I talk about how that relationship, is so beautifully shown through the Holy Family, that the first thing God does is finds the earthly father for Christ. The first thing he's concerned about is because he's modeling that relationship, that icon of the love between God and his church is represented in the Holy Family. And that's the will of God for every family, for one man and one woman who love each other forever, and to raise the kids that they created forever. So there's a lot of what goes into that, I think, about how we disparage fatherhood, how we make men feel sort of ashamed for being a good guy, a good family guy. You don't hear that term much anymore. A good family man. That's kind of like has a negative connotation, sort of a corny guy who does, sticks to the book. That used to be the ideal that we raised up in this country and in this world. The good family man is a man who sacrifices himself constantly for his family.
And we got a question from a viewer here, it's Yvonne. In putting together this book, did you find anybody who embraced Catholicism precisely because his father didn't?
That's a good question. So there was one of the essays in the book is Chloe Langer, and Chloe, her father was adopted, so obviously never knew his biological father, and didn't have a very good upbringing by his adoptive parents. Was sort of dismissed as an adoptive child, and had a big father wound in both of those regards. But Chloe was, so much in love with her father because he made a decision that he was not going to let that father wound fester into the next generation. And he knew that there was so much hurt there that he, you can kind of do two things with that. You can just kind of unleash that pain onto your children, or you can crucify it in a sense, right? Just stop it, stop the pain, and take it upon yourself to reverse the hatred and reverse the pain. And he comes into the church, and his biggest dream is to have children and to be a good father. And this would be a beautiful part of Chloe's essay is when she tells that when she was in the womb, she's the oldest of 8, 9, or 10 children. I can't remember. But she's the oldest. And when she was in the womb, her father wrote her a letter that she was to read when she was 18 years old. And Chloe, I think, only wrote her essay when she was about 20. This was only a couple of years after she would have actually read that letter. So a lot of it is kind of reflecting on her father through that letter. And like I said, she goes into that history of her father and how he stopped that wound. And then the other person that comes to mind is Father Hezekiah. So Father Hezekiah and Father Hezekiah's brother are both phenomenal Catholic priests today, but they weren't even baptized as children. Their father was a doctor, very successful, wealthy doctor who got totally lost in consumerism and the secular worldly affairs of being a successful doctor. His 3 children weren't even baptized. But then he gets divorced because that's what happens when you don't anchor your marriage in faith. And then the mother dies after the divorce, and then the father sort of has this awakening of what is he doing with his life. Divorced, children aren't baptized, addicted to alcohol, consumed with money, and then has this big conversion back to the faith. And then 2 of his sons become priests. And sort of the point of the book is that there's no way 2 priests come out of that family without the father having sort of the courage to change his life around.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, you as you yourself are a father and a husband. You're also a son. And have any of these stories in particular, I'm sure you have many examples, could you just give 1 or 2 examples of stories that particularly stuck with you and helped you to grow as a father or even as a son?
All of them, in a way. Like I said, one of my good friends, he texted me after he was done with the book, and he said, I can already think of ways to be a better father. And that was very, I totally related to what he was saying, because when you read each one, again, there's practical things you take away, and then there's just that inspiration that you feel after you read each one of these essays. So there's definitely ways that one example I would say is that it's quite profound how Mary is a theme throughout almost every single essay. I mean, it's pretty amazing how much she is mentioned by these children who are reflecting on their fathers, whether it was the family who prayed the rosary or the father who prayed the rosary, or some Marian devotion that sort of made the faith all sort of click for them. So just, my wife and I have talked about this. We really have to start, our children are getting to the age where we really have to start, praying that daily rosary together, whether, practical things, whether it's a decade. And I think, we live in a world where we don't really understand. A lot of people don't understand how that's going to have any sort of practical benefit, but if you read these essays, you'll see that something as simple as praying, a decade of the rosary every day, or just praying before your meals, has such an enormous, just changes the whole mind of the child on what the faith is all about. So I mean, one of the other practical things is just that almost all of these fathers, the children mention how much they loved their wives. So I take that very seriously, and I have to walk away saying, am I showing my children how much I love their mother every single day? That sort of first theological lesson that every child gets about we can talk all day about the theological explanation of the Trinity, and how God is that icon. The family is the icon relationship between God and His church, but making sure that you're sacrificing yourself in every way you can for your wife is the lived out experience that the children are going to see, and they're going to naturally understand that theological lesson just through the way that you live. And that was definitely a theme. I mean, I think almost every single one of these contributors talked about how much the father loved their wife, loved the child's mother. So those are just some things.
That's fantastic. I was actually going to ask you if you could give some examples of how to start living the faith more intentionally, but you just gave some really, really excellent examples. And I want to ask you, I guess, about Christian fatherhood. You gave the example, you talked about Mary, you talked about prayer in the family. So what is it that distinguishes, natural fatherhood from distinctively Christian fatherhood? What makes the Christian father special, if anything?
Yeah. So I think I make the point in the book that, and hopefully the way that I'm going to answer it will get to the heart of that question. Sociologists talk about this, biological paternity versus fatherhood. Someone can create a child, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're there for the person. And in the book, and sociology has pretty much, in my opinion, has exhausted that question, that children are going to suffer so much if their fathers are not present for them. The father wound, I mean, everything from abortion to domestic violence to prison time, everything skyrockets when the father is not in the home with the children, loving the mother. And in the book, I sort of make the point that, if you're not convinced of that yet, I mean, I don't even think it's my job here to convince you of that. It's so concrete in sociology that the father needs to be in the home with the children. But then I kind of shift and I say, well, having kind of concluded that point, it's only a logical conclusion that if the father is absent in the spiritual sense, that the children are going to sort of spiritually die and spiritually be malnourished. And that's really the thrust of the book, that if a father is important, he's not just important to keep children in school. He's important because he's a leader and he's a protector, and the children will follow his example. And what I sort of ask fathers in the book is that I say to them, the way that you're living your life, the way, with no intentionality of living the Catholic life, your grandchildren are not going to be baptized. Right. And let me back up a second. In 2015, there's a study, and I mentioned this study in the book. In 2015, there's a study about the changing demographics of religion. 27% of Catholics have left the faith completely. 13% still identify as Catholic, but largely don't practice. So, and I say in the book, I'm talking to that 13% of people. So you want to identify as Catholic. You had your children baptized. There's something there. That there's some truth there that you don't want to fully let go of. Well, here are the statistics. If you keep living in the way that you are, your adult children are going to completely lose the faith, and your grandchildren will not be baptized. And you have to have a conversation with yourself. You have to talk to your ancestors, hundreds of years of fathers who have passed down this faith to you, and talk to them. And what if they asked you the question, why did you let the faith fade away from this family? And what did you replace it with? What did you replace your Catholic identity with? And do you even understand what the Catholic faith teaches? How much of a shame would that be if, thousands of years of fathers pass down this faith, and then it gets to you and you let it fade from your family, and you really don't even know what it teaches. So, you can't, that's really my main point to fathers out there, that those the men who make up that 13%, find out what this is. Don't let it just go. Find out what it is, because you will be the one responsible for your children losing the faith. And this isn't just important because it's a tradition. Okay, fathers pass on traditions, but this is more than a tradition. This is your child's relationship with God, your relationship with his son, that has eternal consequences. So hopefully that kind of answered what it means to be a Christian father.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say in the book, you say that the father essentially there are few people who are more responsible for the eternal salvation of a person than that person's father, you know. And what a profound weight on the father's shoulders. And it seems like so many fathers they've been willing to let it fall away, you know, to not take it seriously. And I think this book is kind of a call, it's a wake up call in that regard. You know, this is very serious.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that the fathers in this book, I mean, they're very different. Some of them are downright heroic. You know, I think of the Vanderwood family. You know, their father who leapt in and drowned in a septic tank, saving his son's life. You know, knowing that he would die.
Right.
There are quite a few other examples of similar heroism. There are also many fathers who are just sort of quiet and ordinary. You know, just a very quiet, steady witness to the faith. And then some of them are deeply flawed. You know, probably all of them are in some way deeply flawed, but we don't necessarily see it. Do you think the fact that these stories are so diverse, that there are so many kind of ordinary men who nevertheless had a decisive impact on their child's faith, whether they realize it or not, do you think that fathers can take courage, can be encouraged by that? Do you think that that's one of the real benefits of this book?
Yeah, because you're not going to read about the same man over and over again. That's definitely, I mean, everything from occupation in life to size of their family to if they, you know, there's converts to the faith, there's people, you know, people who were raised Catholic, people who were raised Catholic and fell away. So certainly you're not also not going to be bored by reading about the same person. Each chapter presents a totally new man, a totally different child who's reflecting in a different way upon that different father. So I think that's definitely true. And then you have, you know, some of these men have become priests, some of them have become lay, some of them are women, some of them are men. So yeah, I think that the diversity in the people that are included is both going to keep you interested, and again, it's going to make many of the stories approachable to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Even though I'm not a father myself, I think I can agree. Actually, I wanted to pose a question on that point. So I'm not a father myself, but I'm a son. And I think this book in many ways helped me to really deepen my appreciation for my own father, my grandfather as well. You know, men who, when I was younger, you know, I profoundly disrespected for no reason. And I think that's part of the fatherhood crisis in our day. It's a lack of appreciation for our own fathers. It's kind of millennial blaming our dads for all our problems, when in fact they probably helped us from becoming worse than we are.
Right. I think Bishop Strickland talks well to that. If you remember his essay, he you know, he doesn't romanticize his relationship with his father at all. He, you know, you can sense there was this tension between him and his father well into his young adulthood, and a total lack of appreciation for the sacrifices that his father made. But you know, eventually, you know, the man reflects back and, you know, thinks of his I think he mentions his father's, you know, his dirty farming hands, and all of the time he spent away from the family was not, you know, some sort of neglect of the family, but was the exact opposite. Yeah. And I just think as children, you know, a lot of times we just don't have the ability to grasp what you know, our father is truly doing. But there's a lot of the fathers in here, you know, besides the Marian theme and loving their wife, I would say the other biggest theme that runs through them is the sacrificial nature of the father, sacrificing his time, sacrificing his money. In multiple occasions, you'll hear of fathers who sacrifice, you know, a much bigger and more lucrative career that they could have had for their children, whether it was a doctor or a lawyer or some other profession. And that doesn't go unnoticed by the child. It might go unappreciated for a very long time. But isn't that what sacrifice is all about, right? You know, you don't understand the cross when it's happening, but reflecting back on the cross, all of that pain that the person endured, you realize was because they love you. And I think that was a huge theme throughout these stories. And, you know, it's not like we were trying to get certain themes, you know, this was just write about your father, but the sacrificing that the father did was enormous.
And Tyler, you as a father, what do you hope your own children write about you someday, or about your faith example?
Well, I guess I would say, well, here's an interesting point to that question. I think no matter what, no matter who you are, your children are going to write a story about you, right? Even if it's not published in a book, even if it's never, written down on paper, even if it's never, included in your eulogy, every child is going to write a story about their father, in the sense that, the memory and the recollection of who their father was and what they did for them and what they gave them is going to live on in the child's mind and through the child's life. So everyone will have that story, written about them. And I think that's one thing that I think men will walk away from this thinking, okay, what are my children going to say about me when I'm gone? And I think the answer for me, I would say, when you asked that question, I thought of Father Ricardo. He has an essay in here about his father, John Ricardo Sr., and he talks about when his father's funeral. His father's in the casket up at the front of the church, and all of the siblings hear their mother bend her head down to the casket and say, "I know Christ because of you." And that's, probably as simple as it gets. What I hope my children say about me: I know God because of you. I know Jesus Christ because of you. And, hopefully I'd be worthy to, be in a book like this someday, where they felt so grateful that they wanted to, write about my life, because, whether they put it down on paper or not, I will either shown them the love of Christ, or I will not have. And it's the most important thing you can do. That's why the book was compiled. That fathers have a primary, a special obligation to pass down the faith. It's a biological and a spiritual truth that fathers are leaders, and there's no one more responsible for doing that. So if my children say, I know Christ because of you, that'll be, I think, as good as it gets for any father.
Well, that's wonderful, Tyler. We're going to wrap up here in just 1 minute, but before we go, I want to ask if are you working on anything now? Any new projects?
I am, in fact. So one of the contributors to this book is Abby Johnson. I think most people are going to know Abby as the pro-life advocate, former Planned Parenthood director. So Abby was a contributor to this book, and actually her father is the only one who's not Catholic. She had a Protestant father, and but she's the only one who had that sort of upbringing. But she has a beautiful essay about her father and how her father actually eventually, even indirectly led her to the Catholic Church. So Abby is one of the contributors. I got to know her pretty well during this. So I had another idea of 20 powerful pro-life stories from around the world, really, that show the dignity of every human life. And I asked Abby to co-author it with me. So we've been working on that. Ignatius Press is going to publish that book as well. So we're if anyone out there, is listening to this and sort of has a powerful pro-life story, you can get in touch with me, and maybe we'll include it in the book. But the real point of the book is to really go after, these hard cases in which people say, even if people say, I'm pro-life, but in these types of cases, certainly abortion is necessary. We kind of go after that, and we say, no, never. Every single life has worth and dignity. Abortion is never okay. It's always the killing of an innocent human being. And these powerful stories where everyone from, the parents to the doctor were telling the mother that they had to abort because this particular life, of course, could not be worth living. And we go right after those cases, and you'll see some amazing had
Awesome, man. We really look forward to putting it out at Ignatius Press, I'll tell you that. And so we're going to conclude here. We had a great conversation with Tyler Rowley, editor and author of Because of Our Fathers, 23 Catholics Tell How Their Fathers Led Them to Christ. You can find out more about Tyler at his website, catholicfatherbook.com, no spaces or hyphens. Tyler, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Really appreciate it. God bless you.
All right, bye.